This morning we'll be judging category 77, which is American style pale ale. American pale ales range from deep golden to golden in color. The style is characterized by American variety hops used to produce high hop bitterness, flavor, and aroma. American pale ales have low to medium maltiness, but it's that body, I think, that's got to come through and about balance.
A typical beer is served in a bottle or a can. You have to put it in a glass to fully appreciate the appearance.
Use a glass that doesn't have too much decoration on it, because you want to see the color of the beer.
Look, it's straight out of the tap, so it's beautifully cold, nice head on it. First thing is have a little smell.
The CO2, the natural carbonation in the beer, bringing the aromas to my nose.
If it's a very hoppy beer, typically say a Pilsner type of beer or an IPA, I would be expecting to actually smell the hops.
You know, wine buffs normally talk about the nose, but here we are now. Beer judges and brewers talk about the nose of a beer.
So now your senses are ready for the next step. So what you do is you take a sip and you swirl the beer over your tongue.
Basically, your tongue perceives 4 different sensations. So sweet, sour, salt, and bitter. And sweets toward the tip, you have salty at the sides, bitter in the back, sour sort of across the middle.
We estimate there's probably 900 compounds that give flavor in beer, and of that, maybe 60 to 80% of those flavor compounds were created by the yeast during fermentation.
Number 2 initially probably had the brightest aroma, but then it went to nail polish.
What about number 6, though? To me, I mean, it's like sour cheesiness, maybe, thinking their hops might have been a little bit old hops.
This is a cerebral exercise now. People want to think about beer. They want to taste the flavors. They want to compare notes.
You use too much Amarillo hops, and you get the to diesel, freeway, burnt motor.
I don't mind 5 going. Okay, fine. So we'll send these other 3 on.
If you talk about complexity in beer, people think, what on earth are you talking about? If you talk about complexity in wine, well, that's fine. Wine's meant to be complex. Well, beer's meant to be complex too.
The brewery is the oldest in the United States, 177 years old, and it was founded by my great-great-grandfather, who came to this country from Württemberg, Germany. All the different immigrants that came to this country all liked their particular kind of beers. My ancestors made German-style beers.
The Yingling family was just a part of a vast wave of eager and industrious immigrants. Between 1840 and 1900, over 4 million Germans moved to America and settled across the country, forever altering the American melting pot.
These were all people who came from a profoundly beer-drinking culture. And when they got here, they discovered there was no beer culture, and there was no culture of pleasure. Germans were astounded by this and hell-bent on trying to do something to change the situation, so they opened beer gardens. Spending Sunday in beer gardens with their families, playing cards, dancing, singing, things that middle-class white Americans thought were shocking beyond belief.
German brewers changed not only the culture of beer in America, but the flavor as well.
Back in the 1800s, you had most brewers making ale-type products. And then when the Germans came, they brought this new method of beer making, and lagers in particular. Lagers were very refreshing, very different from what had been made before.
Lager in German means to lay away. Beer was brewed at cold temperatures and stored in caves. This cold process gave lager its clean, crisp flavor and its name.
Lager brewing, or cool brewing, began to just sweep the world because the beer was better. It was fresher. It was cleaner in its character, almost certainly, and I think the public really appreciated that.
Beer drinking in the mid-1800s was very much different than what we do today in America. Your beer came on draft, and you mostly drank it in the tavern. If you were going to take it home, you would take a supply in a pail called a growler. It would keep for maybe a day, and you'd go back to your local tavern or your local brewery, and you'd refill it again.
In 1870, there were about 3,200 breweries in the United States, virtually all of them at that point owned by German Americans. Men like Frederick Pabst and Adolphus Busch, they both entered the business as young men with really only one goal in mind: to become extremely successful.
Along with fellow immigrants like Bernard Stroh, Frederick Miller, and the Eline brothers of Schlitz, these ambitious entrepreneurs created a new model for brewers, the beer baron.
In the 1840s, all the breweries were really local breweries, sized at brew pub size, that is maybe 7 barrels or 10 barrels or something. The Germans started building breweries, 50 barrels, 100 barrels, 200 barrels. But their big problem was temperature control.
The cold temperatures needed to lager beer limited the brewing season from October through April.
You would brew the beer, you'd put it in caves underneath the brewery, you'd go out into lakes, rivers, and streams in the winter, cut the ice out, put it in the ice house. The cold air would go down in the caves, keeping the beer cold all through the summer months.
And you can imagine what a mess that must have been. There were warm winters, they didn't have enough ice, it was really a problem for them.
In 1871, these difficulties attracted a French chemist, Louis Pasteur. He looked into his microscope and discovered that beer contained microorganisms that were not unhealthy, but could produce sour flavors.
Pasteur found that you can heat the beer to stabilize it and thus kill off the microorganisms that are in beer, that were in beer in the 1800s.
These largest brewers were the first Americans to apply Pasteur's ideas on a large commercial scale.
Later, Pasteur became world famous when his process, pasteurization, was applied to milk. Brewers could now store beer at any temperature, but the brewing of lager beer, fast becoming America's favorite, still required cold weather.
Starting about 1880, they began to hear about innovations in Europe for mechanical refrigeration. They were the first to adopt these technologies. Adolphus Busch and Frederick Pabst both introduced mechanical refrigeration at great expense and with no idea of whether this risk was going to pay off.
They didn't use refrigeration the way we use refrigeration. They called them ice machines. And so all this refrigeration equipment for 20 or 30 years, all it was doing was making the same giant blocks of ice that they were cutting out of their lakes and rivers. And then they would haul those blocks of ice into the brewery. Eventually they figured out they could put a fan in front of the condenser, and modern refrigeration was born.
So it was refrigeration that really changed the way brewers could conduct their business. This allowed brewers, for the first time, to brew fresh beer all year long.